is my favorite member of Congress because he's my home state congressman, but also because I've had the opportunity to know French for about the last 30 years, and just a great career and success in both the private sector and the public sector, somebody who didn't need to run for office but was willing to do so, and does such a fabulous job representing our state and fighting for things that matter. As he mentioned, I've made no secret that the number one priority I have as governor is education. And we started on day one of coming into office focusing really heavily on K through 12 education, and we're able to pass transformational education reform just in the first few months of office. And now we want to build on that foundation that we have set and really lean into what we can do in higher education to make sure that every single student in the state of Arkansas has a pathway to success. We know those all look different, and so we want to make sure that that opportunity is available to everyone. And I appreciate you bringing people together and helping us highlight education here in the state of Arkansas and how we can all work together. And very grateful for your leadership and partnership and willingness to work with us to help serve students in the best way possible.
You're going to ask us some questions, but I want to again just reflect on 10 years in public service, exactly on the governor's point. When I was chamber chairman here in Little Rock, the year or so before I ran for Congress, all of our counties and the legislature, was struggling with how do we have a better trained workforce? How do we take care of those kids, 3/4 of our kids, who aren't going to be four-year college bound? And I love the fact that everybody engaged on that, from our 2-year schools to our 4-year schools in partnership. And so in the past decade, I've seen such a radical transformation of that K through 12 transformation, the strategy of our 2-year schools particularly, the focus on being successful when you graduate as opposed to only being committed to a 4-year education only. And so, Governor, I want to say thank you for recognizing that and putting the structure, the fuel on the fire, and the guidance on that to bring that decade of work, which has been all over the state. And I could brag on every one of my 8 counties on what they've done there. But what you've done is given it structure and fuel that I think will really help a lot of our young people who aren't going to go straight to a 4-year school. And I want to say thanks for that.
Excellent. Well, good morning. My name is Phil Donahue, and this is The Donahue Show.
Bring some chairs out here.
Notice none of the college students know who that is. You just told us how old you are if you laughed at
Some
that.
guy in the back said, I thought his name was Gibson.
So I have the distinct honor and pleasure to moderate this fireside chat between our elected leaders. I have 2 housekeeping matters. So one, you should have note cards at your table that, where's Mr. Cooper? Are you still in the room? Maybe not. Carmen, someone will pick up your note cards with your, okay, thank you. There we go. Ryan Dalbeck will pick up your cards and bring them up for our open question and answer at the end. And secondly, my boss is here, Dr. Tiana Jenkins, the chairwoman of the board of Philander Smith University. So I want to recognize her. Young people always recognize your boss, always recognize your boss. So this first question is for you, Congressman. You recently assumed a new role as chairman of the Financial Services Committee after a long career in banking before joining Congress. What can you tell us about your priorities for this Congress?
Well, first, and the governor knows this because this is another source of arrows in her quiver. You have 6 members of the delegation, 2 senators, 4 House members, and every one of them has a gavel in the United States House and Senate. Unprecedented since 1836. Never happened before. We've had powerful chairs in this representing our state, but we've never had it across the board like this. And we're all, I can tell you, committed to this state and working with our county judges, our governor, our legislature to get something done for that. And we'll work mighty hard for it. So I've been fortunate to be elected by my peers among the House Republicans to be the chairman, which is the senior person on the House Financial Services Committee. And we have term limits for that, so it's a very competitive race every time you change committee chairs in the House for the Republican Party particularly. And so my priorities are first making community banking great again. And it's not right after the election, I put out a 3-page single-space list of all the things that we could do on a bipartisan, bicameral basis that would make our locally owned community banks, and that includes, credit unions too, philosophically, more successful in serving their communities, more access to capital, a better shot at growing. Because in my career, when I started Delta Trust here in Little Rock in the 1990s, in Ashley and Chico County, and then up in Benton and Washington County, there were 275 banks operating in Arkansas. There are now 70 banks operating in Arkansas. And that's true nationwide. And part of that is not technology, it's the cost of regulation has driven some of these small entrepreneurial owners out. They can't afford to do it anymore. And in 1999, there were probably 190 banks started that year. We've only had about 60 start in 15 years since the Dodd-Frank Act passed. So first priority is helping making community banking competitive again. It'll help all of our communities, particularly our small towns. Secondly is digital assets. We need a regulatory structure for what people call slang-wise crypto. But this is the use of blockchain, which is going to revolutionize the American economy, and tokenized payments are an important part of that. So Senator Bozeman and I have the lead on crafting a cryptocurrency, digital assets, blockchain regulatory system, and that's a second priority for me. And then finally, working with to try to create a more affordable housing challenges across the country. We're blessed here in Central Arkansas, but not everybody has what we have, which is a more affordable place to live. And so affordable housing is a key issue for the committee as well.
Thank you, Congressman. This question's for you, Governor Sanders. In November, you announced that you were doubling the state's investment in the University of Arkansas Pine Bluff's Health and Wellness Center to $3 million. Why exactly did you choose this particular project?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. One, and there are several of them here in the room, but there were a few legislators that basically sat outside of my office and weren't taking anything less. And so Linda Chesterfield's laughing because she was one of those individuals. But in reality, and the real story is, I grew up in Pine Bluff. I know what an incredible anchor that institution is, not just for that area, but frankly for the entire state of Arkansas. As our state's oldest HBCU and one of, I think, the biggest educational anchors in that region of our state, it matters. And making sure that students have access not just to the education side, but they have a reason to want to be there. That we have a way to recruit and retain students is really important. When a kid comes to a campus to decide whether or not do I want to attend this school, they need to see that there are some of the fun parts of it and ways to draw them in. And at a time when it is harder and harder to get more and more students to attend a four-year institution, then we're looking for those ways to draw them in. And I felt like this was one of those things that helped us elevate the student experience there at UAPB, but it was also one of their top priorities. And I'm not somebody who thinks, you and I were just talking about this before we walked in, that I show up and have all the answers, but listening to the people who are on the ground, who are doing it all day, every day, that was one of the biggest asks that they had, was help us on this project. We have most of the funding. We need to get this across the finish line. And we think it is one of the best things that we have that helps us bring in new students to the school. And so we listened, we heard them out. And I'm excited to go back and see the completion of this project. But more importantly, I'm excited to see students coming and attending at UAPB, getting the education they need, they deserve, and those students staying here in Arkansas, because ultimately that's what we want to see happen. We want our best and brightest to have a reason to be in Arkansas, have a reason to stay here, and hopefully go into great careers, raise their own families, and always continue to call this place their home.
Thank you. Thank you. Congressman Hill, this next question is for you. What do you view as the top issues facing HBCUs, and what kind of action would you like to see your partners in Congress take on these issues?
Well, we've had, particularly during the 4 years of Trump and coming out of the pandemic, we had a lot of bipartisan support for HBCUs. In the Trump administration before the pandemic, and then inside the pandemic for stability, and then coming out in the Biden administration. Those were good years for HBCUs. I go back to, this was a real priority for President Trump in his first term. I have not talked to him about it yet. We've been a little busy on a lot of different topics. But Sarah will remember when she was the president's communications leader and spokesperson, what a great job Jonathan Holyfield did at the HBCU staff of the White House in getting the executive order the president signed in 2017 on getting federal agencies to cooperate and work with HBCUs really hard. You can see that in evidence now as we go through this change effort in the federal bureaucracy to get them to think about things differently. But Jonathan was a great leader, worked very closely with the United Negro College Fund, the Thurgood Marshall Fund, about how to drive more philanthropy, drive more partnerships to HBCUs. President Trump also was instrumental with Kevin McCarthy, our former minority leader in the House, and Nancy Pelosi, then the Speaker, in two significant debt forgiveness tranches. And I'll say this as a Republican. President Trump gets no credit for this. Or maybe he does behind the scenes and I don't see it. But $1.3 billion in structural debt was forgiven across the HBCU ecosystem, including benefiting this campus and campuses in Arkansas in a major way. And he also cleaned up some debt left over from Katrina that was, people, again, don't focus on that, but it was another, the numbers blow my mind, but it was like $300 billion or something. It couldn't be billion, $300 million, I bet. Yeah. But that was a key component. But going forward, here's what Senator Scott and my co-chair Alma Adams and I are talking about. One is to relentlessly use the HBCU partnership we have with the private sector to push philanthropy, expand student opportunity and faculty and administrating financial support. And we want to look at the IGNITE Act, which we introduced in the last Congress. We didn't get it over the finish line, but Coons and Scott introduced it in the Senate, and Alma Adams and I introduced it in the House. And it was try to fill gaps to encourage the states to support the 1890 institutions and leverage some specific federal dollars in STEM-related facilities, which is a little tough to raise money for in some instances, particularly tough, I think, on HBCU campuses, and a lot of out-of-dated facilities, and then to lever philanthropy for the privates. And that, we called it the IGNITE Act, and again, it's about that kind of niche strategic funding in STEM-related fields on our campuses, and I think that'll be a priority. As we try to prioritize federal spending generally, if I were to try to say what's a way to step up and help, that would be it. And then we can talk more about Pell and some of the recommendations on improving higher ed coming out of the federal government.
Excellent. This question's for you, Governor Sanders. You just announced, hot off the presses, the Arkansas Access package, your higher education reform package. What will the legislation do, and how can Arkansas's HBCUs expect to be impacted?
Sure. So this is a piece of legislation I'm really proud of. It was filed yesterday afternoon. If you haven't had a chance and you have some free time, you may need just a good bit of free time. It's 122 pages. But that means that there's a lot in there, which is a good thing because we're prioritizing higher education. We're prioritizing what it looks like to help students at every level. Secretary Jacob Oliva, the lead for the Department of Education, and Dr. Ken Warden, who helps run higher education here for the state, are both here and helping lead this effort and have done a tremendous job and spent many hours and weeks and months helping work with stakeholders all over Arkansas to develop this piece of legislation. But a lot of what it does, and I'll try to be short and simplify 122 pages into a few minutes, but what it really does is prioritize students. And it prioritizes the idea that every student's journey is going to look a little different than the other. And that doesn't mean they shouldn't have success, but they get to write what that story looks like. As Jacob likes to say, and I like to steal his content on a regular basis, that when a student graduates from high school, they should be either ready to enroll, enlist, or employ. And we need to have students prepared in one way or another, whether that means they're enrolling in an institution of higher education, whether that means they're enlisting in our military, or they're getting employed and going straight into the workforce. What this does is it helps create and open up a lot more pathways. It targets specifically a lot of those first generation students. It takes a really complicated application process and simplifies and streamlines it so that more and more students have a pathway into what that next step looks like. Let me give you an example. For instance, one of the things that I'm really excited about is that at some point we are working on building a platform so that every student, when they apply for higher education in Arkansas, there will be one application where they can apply to every state-supported institution in the state. So we're taking a really complicated system, putting it in one place, but it goes beyond that. It doesn't just have the application in one place. It gives some of those prerequisite requirements. It shows a student, what do I need in order to go to this location? What does it look like when I get there? What are the scholarship opportunities available for me? And that's another big part of access. Opening up more scholarships, specifically adding to the Academic Challenge scholarship, going from $1,000 to $2,000 in the first year, helping, again, a lot of those first-time students have greater access. We're expanding the Workforce Challenge scholarship, really prioritizing access, eligibility, and pathways for every student. Building, one of the areas that I think is really important is building relationships with our high schools and our institutions of higher education. So a lot of students may not know what a great institution exists right here in their backyard, like Philander Smith. This helps by opening up some of those partnerships, building on concurrent credits, allowing there to be a funding model so that you're incentivized to offer them. Helps not only get students onto your campus and into your classrooms at an earlier starting point, but it also helps you develop a relationship so those students say, I want to stay here, I want to go here, I want to ultimately get a degree here. There's a lot of different pieces like that, but ultimately, I think the short version of explaining what is in this piece of legislation is it opens up so many doors and so many pathways that every student, no matter where they start, can write a story on how they're going to finish. And that's what it's supposed to be like. That it doesn't matter what zip code you grow up in, what kind of home life you have, there is a pathway to success, and it's right here in Arkansas, and you can find it, and we're going to help you do that, and we're going to make it a lot easier to get there.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. And while we're not a public institution, Governor Sanders, we have a public mission. So we'd be happy to be a part of this Common Arkansas app. And I'm sure I speak for my other private colleagues as well. So Dr. Warden, if you're in here, we want to be a part of that Common app as well. I love having the mic. I can say these extraneous things. So This is for you, and we have not talked about students a lot, Congressman. And when I met with you 2 weeks ago, you really talked about how in your office, particularly while there's a line out the door for an internship, you rarely have Arkansas students. So this question is about your joint internship with the Financial Services and Banking Committee. How did that come to be, and what are you looking forward to working with Chairman Scott on the Senate side to support Black community and the students?
The inspiration for it was the fact that Alma Adams from North Carolina and I have had this split internship program for several years where an HBCU student comes and works half the summer for her and half the summer for me, and you get this complete window on the House. You work for an African-American former HBCU grad, former HBCU fantastic art instructor. If you've never seen Alma's art, go to her office. You get to see someone who is in the Democratic Party, work for somebody who's in the Republican Party, who's a former banker, financial services person doing international and financial services. So it's the whole diversity of the experience on Capitol Hill. That was the inspiration. So Tim Scott, my co-chair in the Senate, is now the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee. So we thought, man, this would be fantastic if we have HBCU students as interns on both the House Financial Services Committee and the Senate Banking Committee. So that's what we're up to. This will be the first summer. I'm sure we'll be walking before we run. But I think that is such a great opportunity for a college student interested in economics, financial services, real estate, housing, securities. Those are all the topics that deal with, including international finance, because we oversee the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. We spend a lot of time countering China. We deal with terror and illicit finance. So somebody interested in maybe being a future FBI agent or Secret Service agent would do well on that environment too. So we hope this will be a very enriching summer opportunity for our HBCU students.
You will definitely have applicants from Philander Smith University, Congressman. Another question for you, Governor. And Ryan, do we have, because I know we're close on time. Ryan, do we have any cards? If there were any cards, I'll keep going. Okay, I'll keep going. So Governor, and I love the University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. I love them to death. However,
In case you're wondering, that's the UAPB table back there in the back.
So Governor, the state, and rightfully so, has played a significant role in the University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. This next question is, what is your administration doing to support the Central Arkansas HBCUs, so the three privates right here in Little Rock and North Little Rock?
Well, I think a little bit of what I just talked about through Arkansas Access, also things like today. I think that's why it's really important the work that Congressman Hill is doing, is because we're highlighting, bringing awareness to these institutions, making sure people know that they're here, know what they offer, and know that this is a place that they can come and get a great education here in Central Arkansas. And so I'm proud that I get to be part of today's program, and that there are cameras in the back so people see what you're doing, and hopefully they get a chance to talk to and hear from some of the students about their experience here, and we can bring more and more people. But that's exactly why access is so important. That's why we have pushed so hard for this legislation, and why we will continue to over the course of the next several weeks, is because some of the most important recipients are going to be students that come to these institutions. These are going to be kids who get those scholarships, who see that these institutions exist when they go to that Common App that they didn't even know were here, despite the fact they may have grown up down the street from here. They drive by it, but they don't know what's here. They don't know what's offered. They don't know that they have the ability to attend. And so that's one of the things that I think is so important. Also, developing relationships with the leadership and going to those campuses. I've had the chance to meet with the leadership at Shorter, at Arkansas Baptist, at UAPB, at Philander Smith, inviting them to a lot of the programs that we have. One of the most powerful moments that I've had in the last 2 years as governor was when I had the chance to go to the statue unveiling at Daisy Bates, for Daisy Bates at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., and you had a collaboration of UAPB and Philander Smith alumni choir. It is probably one of the most beautiful things that I think I've ever experienced. If you didn't believe that there was a God and you heard that, I think you would have changed your mind in that moment. And I've heard from so many people who were captivated by that performance. People who aren't from Arkansas, don't know anything about our state, but they heard that. And I think moments like that where we have the ability to showcase some of the talent and some of the things that are happening, that's another great way for us to expose people to the different things that are at those different institutions. And again, I think the relationship development with the leadership will be really important for our administration and something that we'll continue to prioritize. And hopefully I'll have the opportunity to do that for the next 6 years. It really take those institutions. We'll continue to invest in those programs. One of the big things that I think is really going to be helpful is changing the funding model. That is a big part of the access legislation, so that institutions like this one can take on some of the short-term workforce development programs that are going to be so critical in the years to come. We're incentivizing that in a way that we never have before. And I think that's a great opportunity for not just UAPB, but Philander Smith, Shorter, and Arkansas Baptist as well.
Excellent, thank you. And you brought up God earlier, and I grew up Baptist. So my favorite part of church is the collection. So at some point Governor, we may pass it, but we may not put you on the spot today, but I assure you we'll be passing the collection plate at some point. So just you brought up God, so I figured that was appropriate.
My dad was a Southern Baptist minister and a politician. So there were basically two things in every event as a kid that I was guaranteed were going to happen. We were going to be there a long time, and he was going to ask for money. So I'm well versed in what both of those things look like.
I love your father. Smart, that's a smart man. So the last couple of questions, Congressman and Governor, are for both of you, and it deals primarily with your experiences, both having worked with President Trump in some capacity. So this first question, which is really imperative for our 4 HBCUs, is that now 1 month into the second term for President Trump, what can either of you, or both of you rather, share about his commitment to HBCUs?
Sure, I'll jump in. I think what we saw in the first term shows the level of commitment he has. First and foremost is he moved HBCUs from the Department of Education and put them directly into the White House, meaning there was a direct line of communication. Now serving as a governor, I see how important it is. If you don't have really good communication with the leadership at the agencies or within the White House itself, it makes a difference. And so by moving that department into his direct office, not only did he show and signal it was a priority to his staff and his team, but to the HBCUs himself. And he gave them a direct point of contact that they knew was going to have his ear and a seat at the table when those conversations were happening. I think also look at what he did during his first term. And French mentioned some of this already, but the loan forgiveness program for Hurricane Katrina, there was $355 million that was wiped away, that had been sitting and frankly holding those institutions back from being able to really move forward after that devastating storm, because they were so saddled with debt that they didn't have the ability to move forward. And that was a big, I think, setback for those universities. And so him wiping that away was a big deal. He also put into his budget, which is something that we've copied here in Arkansas. Senator Chesterfield and I worked closely on making sure our land-grant university in UAPB was actually in the budget, providing that stability and consistency so that you know you have funding coming makes a big difference. If you have to guess, one, is it coming, and two, how much is it going to be every single year, that's really hard to plan for. And so we did that here in Arkansas. We put that into our budget so that it will continue. And let me tell you, once you put something into a budget, it's really hard to ever take it out. And that was the goal. We wanted that to become permanent funding so that there was stability and UAPB didn't have to guess every single time. And the president did that as well. He put about $250 million more into his budget specifically for HBCUs that had never been done before and was frankly pretty historic funding. There was an additional $100 million that went in for HBCUs that was specific for research and data intelligence. That was, again, a historic investment. I haven't had a chance, much like French, in these first few weeks to talk about this issue specifically and what that will look like in this administration. But I think if you look at past practice, it's usually indicative of what the future will look like. He showed it was a priority, not just by talking about it, but investing in it and moving that office into his direct White House. And so I think those are the types of things that we can expect to come again. I'll be at the White House on Friday for the National Governors Association. Education is one of the top topics that governors plan to bring up, and I'm hopeful that this will be a big part of the discussion and what that will look like moving forward for the next 4 years.
Yeah, I just would add that one of his first events he did was host a summit for HBCU presidents, and 70 institution presidents were there. And as I've already said, what a fine job I thought Jonathan Holyfield did in trying to create an all-of-government approach to partner with HBCUs. And there's really nothing more straightforward that would be helpful than that, because that talks about employment, it talks about grants, it talks about educational opportunities. And so I'm like the governor, I look forward to talking to the president about, when he looks at this next 4-year term, how he wants to prioritize support for HBCUs.
Excellent. Ryan, do we have a card? Okay. So we'll take this last question from here, and then I'll start with the questions from the audience. This is for both of you again. Arkansas's HBCUs have long served the needs of the entire community. What do you see as the next employment gap that will be filled by these graduates, and how do we begin to prepare students for those roles?
Well, certainly STEM continues to be an issue. We have an opportunity